When we first made contact with humanity, we were surprised. After all, it's not every day that an interplanetary government screws up so badly that they'd managed to miss an entire new sentient species in our own damn territory. Now it may have been a rather unimportant, undeveloped expanse of our territory. But with the amount of radio signals the humans were flinging into the void with reckless abandon, left our leaders with no excuse. The answers to that question could wait. But the humans could not. They had already deciphered our language and were attempting to hail a colony world of ours that they had apparently been observing for about one of their years already. At least the galactic bureaucracy lady had protocol for this sort of thing. Although it was usually reserved for a primitive species phenolidiscovering FTL and a 100 light-year sphere around their cradle world was set aside for them. Too bad that roughly 30% of that was Karkin space, but we'll get to that later. Once our diplomats made contact with this new species, we were even more surprised at their appearance and mannerisms. You see, Earth happened to be on the very upper limit of the gravitational spectrum that had been theorized for planets able to develop spacefaring life. Indeed, if their gravity were any higher, then it would have been impossible for their early spaceflight attempts to reach orbit. Anthe would have likely given up like we'd seen several other species do, unless they were uplifted. But it was that any race would take on the responsibility of uplifting such a species. Allow me to further explain for those of you who have not had the pleasure of meeting with a human. Most high-gravity sapient species are about half the size of humans at their largest, and use their intelligence and large numbers to solve problems as a group and compete with larger predator species. Now that's not to say the humans were large. Far from it, in fact, as the humans' average height, about 2 of their meters, is just under half of the galactic average height. As such, the humans were rather strong compared to even other high-gravity sapiens and monstrously strong compared to the average galactic species. Furthermore, the humans were rather ungraceful in their movements after living under such high gravity for all their lives. Their motions are quick and efficient, almost mechanical even in comparison with that of the other races. As such, they quickly got a reputation as bumbling strongmen. This reputation was since helped by their seemingly endless optimism and unflappability. Well, in every regard but to their past, they were unflappable. It was rather cute, if I'm being perfectly honest. Seeing the human diplomats blush and squirm as they described a rather boringly common history of warfare and strife, they were so ashamed of it that it made a few of our diplomats laugh as they described to the increasingly relieved humans that they weren't monsters for fighting a few wars among their people. It also didn't help the stereotypes that humans had a way of using brute force to solve problems. Human engineers even used their percussive maintenance techniques regularly when stationed on ships and stations. And to quote one saying, "The only surprising thing about a human's mashing a piece of delicate machinery to fix it is that it actually starts toe work once they are done." The more we learned of the humans, the more allowable they seemed to be. They became the butt of many jokes among the members of the bureaucracy. The humans found out, of course, and our government cringed in anticipation for the worst kind of retribution. Part of the reason that there were so many jokes about the humans is that we were all still a bit afraid of the monstrously strong apes. But the humans, to borrow one of their own expressions, the humans didn't give an underscore. They laughed it off and even shared a few jokes they made up at their own expense. Although this experience helped to assuage many of the fears that the species of the bureaucracy had about the humans, several new jokes were made about them in good faith. I assure you, one of them being that if a species tried to invade human space, then they'd give up their cradle world without a fight. For the next couple of years, the humans were contentedly expanding with an area of buffer space, setting up mining stations, colonies, and trade deals left and right. The humans were natural laborers. It turned out galactic average intelligence, which, to give the humans credit, was nothing to scoff at, combined with their monstrous strength and seemingly endless energy reserves, meant that they could churn out resources and consumer goods like no other species we'd ever seen. It was beginning to look like the start of an economic golden age for the humans, and Devirian was happy for them especially because of the high quality of the goods that they produced. It was too bad that the largest trade deal fell through. The humans, rather early on in establishing interspecies trade, signed a ludicrously profitable trade deal with Sarek's stellar gospel, a highly religious avian species that has been teamed to peacefully convert the rest of their galactic neighbors to their religion with little success. The stride deal was the backbone of the human economy and provided them with the resources they needed to begin production of goods on a scale never before seen by human commerce, which makes what happened next, as I said previously, a minor tragedy. One of the human leaders was caught by some RIM system, tabloid rag calling the Sark the Jehovah's Witnesses of the galaxy, and that he was rather annoyed sometimes with their ever-present evangelism, even though they made excellent trade partners. The article made its way to the purview of the Sarsic High Speaker, and outraged at the comments. She declared that all Sarek trade with such a godless and unthankful species wouldn't immediately. She immediately contacted her diplomats in the bureaucracy and had them put forth a trade embargo. When said trade embargo was put forth to be signed by any other species wishing to also embargo Theia humans, we all expected them to be outraged, as this would surely set their economy into a downward spiral for years. But as before, the humans didn't give a underscore. To be fair, the humans were rather affected. They just didn't seem to mind too much. They even apologized it for the rudeness of the leader whose statement outraged the Sarek. Their economy was reliant on that trade deal, and it took about 2 decades to fully recover, even though only one other species signed the embargo. The Avaricelationist underscore off. You Xeno scum don't deserve to know the name of our species or its glorious empire. Yes, that is literally the name of their empire in our database. Yes, they mock us, say the entire damned thing before they will acknowledge us. No, we are not sure why they still come to the meetings of the bureaucracy either, and they had embargoes on every other empire already. So this was likely a convenient opportunity for them to embargo the new race. Humanity's troubles with the rest of the galaxy did not end there, however. While they were in the final stages of rebuilding their economy, they managed to finally be noticed by Theckercon Infinite Armada, whom they shared a border with. It was inevitable that Thadikarkans found out about them. Despite the efforts of the other members of the bureaucracy to keep their species off the Karkans' radar. For those of you that are not in the know, Karkan Infinite Armada was a heavily militarized nation that had been terrorizing the galaxy for the past 5 centuries. They were not a part of the galactic bureaucracy, and were also thankfully not genocidal or heavilificist on expansion. They did, however, possess enough military power to take on the entire bureaucracy at once, and hold their own if not prevail. They had slowly been taking territory from those whom they shared a border and had been at war with every member of the bureaucracy at one point in their history. Now this juggernaut had set its sights on the budding human empire. To the Karkans, the humans were an enigma, but more importantly, they were an untested enigma, one ripe for the picking at that. We'd done well in hiding as much information about the species as we could. But when the Karons found Otho strong, the humans were. They were frothing at the mouth to fight with them. It was a rather normal day within the bureaucracy when a representative from the Karkan Infinite Armada threw open the doors to the UHS meeting chamber and formally declared war on the humans. Well, the other races were good enough at pattern recognition at this point to not be too surprised when the humans didn't give an underscore. The humans looked to us for aid in defending their territory, but we would not risk bringing down the wrath of the Karkans on our people. We explained to them how hopeless it would be to try and fight them, even if every member of the bureaucracy joined forces. The humans nodded and excused themselves from the meeting chamber to plan as wished them luck. A few days later, and as with every time before, a human and a Karkan representative were brought before the other members of the bureaucracy to attempt to avoid the war. To everyone's surprise, all the Karkans actually wanted was 10 light years from the border that they shared with the humans. All in all, everyone was surprised at how little the Juggernaut wanted from the new race until we realized that their cradle, its world was within that 10 light year span. It was then that even the Sark and the Isolationists looked down at the human representative with pity. We all expected their lackadaisical attitude to shine through once more, that they would just give up their home world like all the jokes said they would. We saw a Lucaff reassignment on the human's face, as she, to no doubt, realized that this deal would cost them their cradle world. At any moment, we were expecting a feign law and a verbal confirmation of surrender. But instead, we were met with a long, unnatural silence followed by a sentence that I have framed sitting on my desk to this very day. We of the Human Emirate Republic have deemed these terms to be unacceptable. Prepare yourselves for war. And with that, the humans declared war on the most powerful military in the entire galaxy, and they didn't give an underscore about a month after the declaration. The human fleet looked nothing like it did before. The humans were an industrious bunch after all, and the progress that they made forging ship after massive ship so quickly only solidified that. Also, seemingly out of spite, the humans proposed a total embargo on the Karkan Infinite Armada. The embargo was very thorough. Not a single credit would be changed between the members of the galactic bureaucracy and the Karkan Infinite Armada for the duration of Thur. The humans applied pressure on us to sign it, citing our inability to help them militarily and asking for us to at least do this for us. We signed it. Alafas, even the isolationists. It's not like we actually traded much with the Karans. Anyways, their main export was mining explosives, and they didn't have any imports beyond luxury and toxins. So they merely laughed us off when they got the news. 2 months after the declaration, a meeting was called to discuss the rules of the upcoming war. The human High General, a woman by the name of Felicia Aratus, and the human High Admiral Aman by the name of Simon Bale, met with the Karkan Infinite Admiral, whom declined to give a name, stating that his rank and station as leader of his species was far more important. The two humans presented a document to the bureaucracy that was rather well-rounded and had murmurs of assent from all members. But it was ultimately up to the Infinite Admiral whether or not he accepted these terms. And as was tradition with most new races the Karkans encountered, the Infinite Tinral took the perfectly reasonable document and tore it to shreds before the human commanders. There will be no rules to this engagement. I wish to see the brunt of your capabilities, humans. I will come at you with claws unblunted by a concept so meaningless as rules of war, and I'd expect you to do the same, the Kar said with a feral grin on his face. The humans, in typical human fashion, didn't give an underscore. They looked at each other, nodded, and said, "Very well," before turning and taking their leave. With that, the war began, and the humans were losing badly. Their fleet gave light year after light year. But those massive ships that the humans had been constructing were nowhere to be seen. Webb believed them to be guarding the colonies from surprise attack. That belief lasted only until the first human colony world was reached by the Karkan fleet. The humans didn't even put up a fight. There wasn't a single military ship in the system. And as the Karkans began, bombarding the planet from orbit, unchallenged, the rest of the bureaucracy was outraged. How could the humans leave their own people to be attacked from orbit? For their part, the human representatives merely remained passive and unmoved by our outrage and demands for action. They calmly reminded us that they simply didn't have the military power to fight off the Karakans, and that they had asked us for help before the war even began. That shut us up. Their words cut us deeply, as our words left them unfazed. It seemed that they didn't even give an underscore about their own people until an outraged transmission from the Kark Navy Ricketus. The humans had completely evacuated the entire colony. The Karkans had wasted thousands of tons of nuclear, biological, and chemical bombs on an empty world. Shortly thereafter, another even more outraged transmission from the Karkans reached us as retaliation for rendering their colony world uninhabitable for years due to the radiation and biological agents that the Karkans hadroned from the sky. The humans launched pinpoint biological strikes anal major Can Ranch worlds. The horrific cocktail of viruses, bacteria, parasites, and even pions that the humans had dropped on those worlds rendered the livestock that the solely-like carnivorous Karens relied on inedible and deadly. In that single operation, the Karkans lost over 90% of their food production. And with the embargo, Thathi had all but coerced us to sign months prior, We were powerless to stop it. In a single hour, the humans had doomed billions of Karkans to die of starvation without giving a single underscore. The human representatives merely smiled with the grim satisfaction of a successful mission when they heard theatraged cries of the Infinite Admiral. The Karkans, of course, attempted to retaliate and strike the human agricultural worlds, but it was here that they faced their first true bit-off resistance. The humans guarded their agricultural worlds fiercely, even more so than their industrial centers. The humans fought where they had the greatest advantage, with their immense strength and smaller size. The humans built boarding craft by the thousands sand, the Karkans' superior numbers and technology. It didn't really matter if they couldn't repel the human boarders. Thekarans learned quickly, though, and rigged their ships to explode before the humans could take control of them in turn. Their guns to bear on the rest of their fleet. It took months and thousands of Fuman and car ships and lives. But the Karkans did eventually likewise decimate the humans' agricultural capabilities. But it was here that the omnivore shamans had the advantage of being able to grow food in hydroponics bays on board their ships. Not only did the humans biologically bomb their own agricultural worlds before they could be taken, but they slaughtered and burned their livestock in fires large enough to be seen from orbit before the Karkan soldiers could land. At this point, the Karkan people were beginning to starve. Reports from our agents in Can Space were grim. Their people were beginning to riot, and even a few sects began resorting to cannibalism. In retaliation, the Infinite Admiral had a public execution on their cradle world for all of the human prisoners. Mostly farmers that had volunteered to stay behind on the agricultural worlds and keep the farms running for as long as they could. The humans, as usual, didn't give a underscore. They offered their deepest condolences to the families of the people whom volunteered to stay behind. But the war marched on. We asked the humans if they needed to purchase food for their people, but they declined. The humans knew that should an interplanetary species decide to do so, it could easily produce enough food to crash the entire galactic economy, which is just what they did while they evacuated their worlds and built up their fleet. Trillions of tons of food were produced, preserved, and packaged, enough for their entire race to never go hungry for centuries, if not millennia, much of which is still around even to this day. Speaking of those evacuations, most of those massive ships that we saw them constructing were called Ark Shipsby, the humans. They fired every civilian they could into the void between stars in these massive ships, stuffed with billions of people and enough food to last centuries each. All the humans had to do was wait. Thekakon, Infinite Admiral, knowing already that his empire was crumbling and that they wouldn't be winning this war, issued another enraged decree. The full force of the Karkan, Infinite Armada, bore down on the Sol system in a weeks-long battle that ended with Thekarkons launching a gravitational cataclysm. The waves of gravity that the cataclysm produced cracked the Earth into 12 pieces. Once the news of Earth's destruction found its way to the floor of the bureaucracy, we were shocked as we witnessed. For the first time since first contact, the humans give a underscore to say that it was unnerving was an understatement. For the first time in recorded galactic history, a human, a full-blooded from Earth human, was seen giving an underscore. However, they were no too traged as we thought they should be. They didn't call for blood or cry out in rage for genocide. They were depressed. They wept for the loss of their Cray world, a loss that would take centuries to recover from. But even as they wept, a dangerous sort of determination began to grasp them, and it terrified each and every one of us. In that moment, we knew that the humans were going to see Thistro to the end, and that it would not be pretty. After that, the human fleet began reintaking worlds until they'd pushed the exhausted and starving Tarns back to the edge of their old borders. And only then did the Karkan government call for a surrender. Their fleet was in tatters and limping along on the little food that they could synthesize on board their ships. The same two humans, High General Felicia Aritis and High Admiral Simon Bakil, met with a withered Shadioff, what had once been the hulking form of the Karkan Infinite Admiral. Alrises save the humans looked down at the withered Karkan with pity in their Isis he spoke, already knowing what the stone-faced humans were going to say in response to his unspoken question. Humans, you have burned my empire from within. The last time I spoke with you, I told you that we would come at you with claws unblunted and implored you to do the same. I can safely say that this was the biggest mistake in the history of my people, the weary Karkin said, swallowing dryly as he forced himself to continue. And know that you have pushed us back to the border, and our defeat is a foregone conclusion. I must perform my final duty as leader of my people. The Karkin Infinite Armada would formally like to declare surrender, the tired admiral said, the defeat evident in his eyes as he took off his ceremonial blade and offered it to Theto humans. Please, I know that we do not deserve it for what we have done to your cradle, but I cannot stand to see Oni more of my people starve. Please show them mercy. The silence in the air was deafening. The looks of pity on the faces of every sapient in the room, save the still stoic humans, deepened, and a sadness at knowing the Karkan people were about to be no more drove more than one representative to tears. We, on behalf of the human Emirate Republic, accept your surrender. Your lands will become our lands. Your people will become our people, and we will treat them the same way we treat our own, High General Aritis said, making jaws of every non-human in the room fall open in shock as she walked forward and took his blade. You, however, will publicly executed for giving the order to shatter Earth. High Admiral Batchel said, making the Karkins sigh and nod. If this is the price I must pay for my people to live, then so be it. I was prepared for this, the former Kakan ruler said, standing up and looking proud once more as 2 human guards came forward and began to escort the Kakan away to await his execution. Might I say a word to my people before I go? There will be plenty of time for that, Lator, High Admiral Batchel said, making the confusion in the room perceptibly rise. We will need your help in Savingas, many of your people as we can. So, as much as it pains me to say it, your execution will months, if not years, in the future, the man said, a hint of foniance in his voice. With that statement, the Karkin was leaded out of the room, followed quickly by the Twodyman leaders, a smile on both of their faces. The humans then invaded what was formerly Karkan space. Peacefully. They had more preserved and frozen meat than they could ever hope to eat on their own, and they made sure to provide the starving Karkins with as much food as was safe for them to eat. Within a year, the humans had established supply Linus Throat, the now completely annexed Karkon space, and had stopped any more of their new people from starving than the humans released. More biobombs onto the former Kan Ranch worlds. Only this time, the cocktail of biologically engineered horrors were designed to wipe out the previous bowel ponds that had destroyed the Karan livestock, as well as providing the Khans with a sweet officins for themselves and their livestock in case. The counteragents weren't completely successful. It took several more years, but the humans and Khans together were able to get their space back to full self-sufficiency. As for the Karkins, the integration into the human Emirate Republic's way, after doing things went smoothly, the Karkans were raised to believe that might makes right. After all, it was against their Hanor to disrespect those they considered their superiors. They knew that the humans could have wiped them out completely, and they respected them for their mercy. It also didn't hurt that the Karkans didn't have a concept of sports beyond public jewels. Winnow non-lethal, make for a wonderful evening. And the various human sports offered the Karkans the perfect outlet for their warlike nature. Plus the fact that their former ruler was at the Sidief, the human leader, was telling his people to trust the humans, didn't hurt her. Speaking of the former Infinite Admiral, he was granted a permanent stay-off execution after human citizens everywhere threatened a riot. The humans actually decided to spare the life of the being that was responsible. The complete and irreversible destruction of their cradle world. It didn't even surprise us at that point. Once they finished rebuilding their territory, the humans quickly filled the power void that the Karkan Shad left behind, using the resources and technology of the dismantled Karkan government to quickly rebuild a grand fleet manned by both Karkans and humans alike, as well as begin an economic golden age that continues to this day. Years later, I asked the human that had been ruler of their kind at the time, off war, about why the humans had decided to attempt the largest siege war in galactic history. In his words, we knew that the Karkans wanted to humiliate us. They wanted to hold their status as the big bad bullies of the galaxy over use and gloat as they took Earth. So, we took a gamble. We gambled that Thecacons were producing only the bare minimum amount of food needed to feed their people. As is the case with the isolationists, they don't export anything but mini explosives. So there's no need to produce too much more food than their public needed. He said this with theesome deadpan attitude that you or I would discuss what unremarkable thing we had for breakfast. I then asked him about the only time I'd ever seen a human give a underscore. I asked him about Turth. He sighed for a moment and took a drink of whatever was in his glass. We were prepared for losses. But I'm sure I don't have to tell ya how much a species first world means to them, he said, his voice shallow and sad. He sighed once more, and as though we're talking about a concession in a business contract, had the gall to tell me that it was an acceptable loss. I couldn't help myself. Here I was thinking that I had actually seen those humans give a underscore. But in reality, it was merely them coming to terms what they believed was the inevitable. A son diplomatic as it was, I remarked about his species' unnatural ability to never truly give a underscore about anything, and he laughed. It was then that I learned off the creature that the humans called the honey badger. And everything made sense. The humans knew that they couldn't beat the Karens in a straight-up fight. Nobody could have. Their military might was a match for the entire galactic bureaucracy put together, but they didn't need to fight fair. No, they wereth only species in the galaxy that could fight without giving a single underscore. So, it remains that nobody has ever seen the humans truly give an underscore about anything since first contact. And with the power that they now possess, I doubt they ever.